So we're here to talk about enhancement strategies for mental skills. And when we think about fundamental skills that enhance our mental performance and those that facilitate better performance overall, we want to start with goal setting. And the reason that we start there is because goal setting directly influences an individual's motivation, their drive towards achievement, the energy that they have to put into those goals and their achievement strategies, and their overall persistence along the way. And so what we really want to do is be able to understand a general framework around how you would go about effectively setting goals and achieving those goals. So the first thing you want to think about when figuring out and setting your goals is to make sure that your goal or goals are in specific terms and they're measurable both for action and behavior. And the reason being is because that actually gives you something to focus on and reflect against in the future. And so lots of times when people come to Climb Strong or they're working on their own goals, or you'll talk to somebody at the cliff and they'll say, oh yeah, I'm trying to climb 513 or I'm trying to climb 512. That is good, but it's not good enough and is actually quite confusing. And so to the person. And so what we want to do is clean that up a little bit and say, okay, what type of 513? Do you have a specific route or routes that you want to try? Do you have specific skills that you want to develop? What are those specific skills and can you name them? And then can you make your goals, whether they're for the day, for the week, or the year, can you make them measurable? And what I mean by that is, like, we can simply measure grade in climbing. So that is a 5.9, this is a V7. But oftentimes we talk in terms of like, oh, today I want to just climb better, or I want to be more positive during the session. So how do we then turn something that is subjective, like positivity or better, into a measurable instance? And the easy way for you to do that is just to say, okay, on a scale from 1 to 10, I want to be about a 7 out of a 10 on my positivity scale. And then after the fact, after the session, you can reflect on that in a very tangible way and say, okay, maybe I was a little bit of like a 5 out of 10 on my positivity scale, and I can work to do X, Y, and Z behaviorally in the future to bring that number up over time. The second thing that we want to pay attention to when working on our goals is setting moderately difficult goals, but realistic. And so what we're looking at there is evaluating whether or not your short-term and long-term goals are realistic for you as a person and as an athlete, and then whether those goals are too easy for you or too hard. And so people talk about this as being like the sweet spot or the growth zone, and thinking about it in terms of like, okay, I want this to be at a moderate difficulty for me so that I can strive to get there and work hard really. And like the likelihood of me achieving that goal is higher than not. And if we look at it on the other ends of that spectrum, or the outside of the moderate goal, the moderately difficult goal, on the front end, we have a too easy of a goal. And so if we set a goal that is too easy for ourselves, the importance level drops. And so our drive to achieve that goal, our motivation to be there in the training, in your training, goes down, and you hold less importance for that. So the likelihood of you achieving it or giving it any thought is much lower. The same thing can be said for the other end of the spectrum when you're setting goals that are too challenging for your ability level. We can look at it in the future and say, well, that's a long-term goal. But if we're setting moderately length timeline goals that are too hard for your current ability, so for instance, let's say I'm a 512 climber and I've climbed a few 12Bs. If my goal for the next year is to climb 514A, that's likely quite a bit out of my current ability levels. And that creates a lot of confusion and opportunity for frustration and failure, which is important to recognize because that like repetitive failure and frustration creates a lot of self-doubt around your ability as a rock climber. And so what we want to do is back off the nature of that goal and say, okay, what's a moderately challenging goal for me right now at my current ability levels? Well, if I'm a mid 512 climber, that's probably somewhere around the 13A or B range within a year time frame, depending on the individual. Or you can say, I want to climb 312Ds within this next year. Something that you actually have the capability of comprehending and what you might do to lay out as far as short-term goals to strive to reach those goals along the way. And so what we want to do again is make sure that our goals are moderately challenging but realistic for our current ability levels so that we can maintain a persistence towards those goals over time. So the third thing that we want to pay attention to when framing our goals or deciding what to work towards is making sure that we set short-term goals and long-term goals. And if you watch anything that Ben Moon talks about in terms of like sport climbing goals or bouldering goals, he has a really great framework for looking at lifetime goals, project level goals, second tier level goals, and then like volume-oriented level goals. And that's a great way to visualize on paper the way that you set your goals up. And so we want to be thinking long-term vision. What do I want to do in 5 years from now or 10 years from now? And then what am I going to do next week? Lots of times we're stuck in a pattern of thinking either in just the next week frame of mind, so short-term frame of mind, or just a long-term frame of mind. And that can be really challenging when it comes to sustained energy and motivation towards reaching those goals, staying consistent and on track with the goals that you've chosen, and having a longer-term vision of who you want to be and where you want to go as a climber. And so understanding that when you sit down and you're writing out the things that you want to do in climbing or in life, we want to be able to pick goals that live in the range of like long-term, 1 to 5 to 10 years out. And that might be, you're talking about this 12A climber, that might be, okay, in 5 years, I would love to have achieved 514A. Or in 10 years, I would love to have climbed 514. And you don't need to be super specific about that. But then if you dial it back a little bit and you say, okay, what are the short-term goals that are going to facilitate that long-term experience? You would look at breaking that down and going like, all right, in the next month, I want to be able to climb on 5 new mid-range 512s, 12B to 12C. In the next 6 months, I want to develop my tactics as it relates to harder red point climbing. And in 1 year, I'm hoping to be able to climb 513A. And so before that, I also need to get on a few lower end 513s to decide what are the facets of my climbing that I need to improve on and what types of routes do I even like being on. And so these short-term goals are really facilitative in our ability to maintain motivation and drive and striving for the long-term goals that exist in the future. And one great way to visualize this for yourself is we like to look at it as a staircase. And so the bottom step on the staircase is your current ability levels, where you currently reside. And the top of the staircase is your long-term ultimate goal. And then everything in between is process-oriented or performance-oriented that build upon one another, that help you get to where you want to go, that gives you this roadmap to the long-term vision of who you want to be.